Alright, it's time again to start. Now, I said at some point when you do visionaire with a very long string, it's secure. The thing that we actually consider secure, it's called the one-time pad. So for this one, it's basically visionaire with a key that is as long as a ciphertext. The way that we usually do it is to do everything in binary. So we have the alphabet is just 0, 2, 0, 1. And the key is as long as the ciphertext. Oh, the plaintext, sorry. And that every bit, every position in the key is independently random. So every bit in the key is randomly chosen. So as an example, you have that your plaintext is some 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0. And now that your key have to get the same length, so 8 characters. 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1. And the encryption is just XOR. Which is the same as addition in the fine field of 2 elements. So that means if you see 2 ones, we add them, it gives 0. If you see 2 zeros, we add them, it gives 0. If you see 1 plus 0, 0 plus 1, we get 1. So we have 1 plus 1 is 0, 0 plus 0 is 0, 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 1 is 0, 1 plus 0 is 1, 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 1 is 0, and 0 and 1 is 1. So this thing here is the ciphertext. Yes, something is wrong.
The fourth digit should be 0.
That one is wrong, indeed. Thank you. For machines, this is very easy. For humans, it should be easy unless it's the 4th hour. Great to see that you're more awake than me. Keep it that way. Now, if you see a bit here, if you see any bit in the ciphertext, you don't learn anything about where it came from. This 0, well, in this case, it was a 0, but it could also have been a 1 if the key bit at that position was 1. So we call this information theoretically secure. You do not learn any information from the ciphertext about the plaintext. So the OTP is information theoretically secure. That means, i.e., the ciphertext does not give any information about the plaintext. And so the argument I was giving a moment ago is if you see a 0 in the plaintext, it has a 50% chance of coming from a 0 and a 50% chance of coming from a 1. 0 in ciphertext has 50% chance so 0 might be 0 plus 0, i.e. 0 in plaintext. And again, well, same 50% chance of being the result of 1 plus 1, meaning that it was a 1 in the plaintext. Now for this it's important that the bits in the key are not dependent on anything. If you would have any relation between those, if you would have bursts or no bursts, I mean, 3, if you ask like how likely is it there's 3 consecutive 1s, that's only 1/8 chance. However, it still happens. Now if you see many more 1s and 0s, then probably your random number generator is broken, or your physics, where you get the random bits from, is broken. But on such a short key, this is totally random. This is totally possible output, even though I only had 2 zeros and 6 1s. Each time I flipped the coin in my brain, and it came out. Now, it's a cool thing. It's also very inconvenient. It needs that the key is as long as the ciphertext. It's called one-time pad, not two-time pad. So can you see what goes wrong if you use it twice? So, not good. This key to use. So if I end up having that my ciphertext 1 is the outcome of some message 1 plus the key, and some ciphertext 2 is the output of message 2 and the same key. And why is it not desirable? I mean, what bad things do you learn? What good things do you learn? What information do you get? Yeah?
You can learn something from the messages from nothing. If the ciphertext changes and the message on a certain date also changes,
So, I mean, you see like a 0 in the output here, you see 1 in the output there, and then you know that the bit was the opposite here. You still don't know which one it was, but it was different. Yes?
If you would use the key, can you get the message?
If I do what?
If you reuse the key, does that mean that you get the plain text back?
Not obviously. I mean, it is still like you and I are communicating. I sent you a message this morning, and then I'm an idiot, and I sent you another message now with the same key. Now, my class knows I'm stupid after 5, so you have a good guess that I used the same key, but you still don't know what the key was. You, over there, you know I used the same key, but you have the key anyway, else you couldn't be able to decrypt. I mean, us as legitimate people communicating, we know the key, and then you go like, oh, Tanja again. You guys have a speculation it might be the same key. First of all, how could you get confirmation it's the same key? Let's assume I always start my emails the same way. Like, dear Alice, yours Tanja. How do you find out whether I was again stupid after 5 and used the same key? Yeah?
If you like do the XOR on these two messages, won't you just get like M1 XOR M2? And then if it's the same always, then there will be zeros and parts that always repeat.
Okay, so here's a recommendation to do XOR on these two. Well, let's do that. Then we have here C1 XOR C2. And here we have M1 XOR K XOR M2 XOR K. Now remember, we're computing XOR, that means we're computing mod 2. So whatever is the key, if there's a 1, we're getting a 1 and 1 here, so 0. If the key bit was 0, we're getting 0. So this is the same as the XOR of the message 1 plus the message 2. So if and now, since my bits and bytes are not as intuitive as writing letters, so M1 was Dear Alice, say, let's meet for lunch. Here's Tanja. And then M2 is Dear Alice, long day again. Let's assume I have the same number of characters, more characters. Here's Tanja. Let's assume that these magically line up and have the same length. What do you see in the XOR?
No.
Let's assume that all of these are bits. And these bits are all the same. Zero, 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 stuff, 0, 0, 0, 0. And now you know she did it again. Now, there's not two things you could do. One is, you could have had Alice under observation and you know that Alice and I met for lunch. That gives you a good motivation to figure out that, well, let's assume I wrote let's meet for lunch, or 5 variations of the same. Then you get key candidates and you try those key candidates, like you know the plaintext M1 and you try your key candidates on the M2, and if that then suddenly gives something reasonable, you actually know what the key was. Now hopefully it's not a 3-time pad, but at least you get more information than you had before. So seeing lots of zeros in the XOR confirms the key we use. And if you can guess the key from the first part, you can try it in the second part. And then you have a much more interesting way of child encrypting. Now, with natural language, there's a lot of variation in here. But if you think of this being an encryption of the website, and you don't know what's going across the internet, but you see it's encrypted, then so could use this. Say to fingerprint. And let's assume there's like some form letter or some like a transaction form in a bank which is always the same. and then there's one field which is the money. So this is my transaction of 100 euros. And then you want to know whether this was again me. So here is my account number, account Tanja, and then this one, you know, was from Tanja. And then you look at this one, and you go like, what is this? And if I'm stupid enough to reuse my key, then you do the XOR, and you get, where here was lots of stuff filled in, you're getting that if the XOR is 0, except for the little box here, then you know it came with all the other information being the same. And you might already be happy to know that, say, one of my transactions was at least reaching 1,000, because the XOR of those numbers had the first bit set. Now, of course, it could also be, if you see a 0, that both of them had the first bit set. But if one of them has the first bit set, you definitely learned something. And more importantly, our nice proof that everything is independently at random is no longer true. Now we have a strong correlation between two messages. We know that if I would just have length 8, you would know that the first and the 9th bit are correlated, the second and the 10th bit and so on are correlated, well, even identical. So our assumption about them being as likely the same as the other ones is no longer true. If we now would have a 0 here and a 0 there, then we're getting information about 2 bits by making just one guess. Normally you make one guess, you may get information about 1 bit, and here we make one guess, get information about 2 bits. So don't do that. But that's very inconvenient. So how do you do key distribution? I mean, this means you need a long key. But it's doable. I mean, if you have a friend who lives far away, you go there once a year with a little suitcase full of USB drives, you send them, here is my one-time use them in sequence, first the first USB stick, next USB stick. I mean, like a 128 gigabytes micro SD card doesn't need much space. You can do a lot of encryption with that, and you do 2 copies of it, then you have one, your buddy gets one. You can do one-time pad with single people. If you have many friends, this starts getting more challenging to distribute. You have to then remember, oh, this was the key I'm using for Alice, this was the key I'm using for Bob, this was the key using for Charlie. It's doable, but we rarely use this in practice. This is something which we do for very important connections, say for the red phone between Moscow and Washington, they use the one-time pad. And that is also like 2 people, fixed ends, and you really don't want to risk anything. But how do normal people do this? I mean, you are using HTTPS in your browser, so you apparently use some crypto, at least, well, in theory the S stands for secure, and you never got this suitcase full of USB sticks. Yes, you get something from your bank, little random reader, or a more advanced one from Rabobank where you put in your card, but that's still not like terabytes of zeros and ones. So how are you encrypting this stuff? So what we end up doing is we're moving away from this ideal of information theoretically security to something which is still not breakable with everything we know. So we're now getting into the muggy areas of crypto where well, somebody asked me, is this secure? I can never say yes. Well, for the one-time pad I can say yes, but for anything else I can't say yes. I can only say we haven't broken it yet, and lots of people have tried, and we have a pretty good feeling it will stay secure. But we don't have any proofs, we don't have any guarantees. The only guarantee you can get is when you break something. Like, if you have a cipher and you don't get the plaintext, then you have a proof that it's broken. But you will never ever have a proof that it's unbreakable, except for in such situations where you have like very unusable systems. So what we want is a more practical situation, or more practical use, and we will be okay with security to the best of our knowledge. Well, our knowledge at this moment is maybe not the best thing, let's say to the best of the world's cryptographers' knowledge. To the world's crypto knowledge. Well, you'll never get the world crypto knowledge, so minus NSA, GCHQ, FSB, etc. I mean, if you work for one of them, then you have that part, but then you won't talk to the Russians, so you will never at any moment really have all the crypto knowledge. On the other hand, there's lots of us who do cryptanalysis, who try to break things. There's also people who design things. So the best of the world's crypto knowledge, even minus whatever shady agencies, is pretty good. It's always a case we might have overlooked something, but things don't get into your browser unless we have spent like 10 years in serious effort. Well, it's kind of a downer from like, okay, we've done all the historic systems that you can now break on your laptop or maybe with pen and paper to something which is really, really secure, and now we're lowering our standards. On the other hand, we really don't have the internet as we know it if you really have to bring attaché suitcases of USB sticks to everybody you want to talk to. So then, what we want is, this means a much shorter key so typically our key is going to be an element of, well, it's going to be bits again, and it's going to be 128 of those, or maybe twice as long. So 0 to the 256. So there we assume that the best attack is a brute force attack, so that the attacker would need to try all combinations. And right now, if you take a lot of time in computers, you can do 2 to the 80. You will be hard-pressed to do 2 to the 90 in anything that your data is still interesting. And then we add some more, say, we have our security margin of more than 30 bits here. So more than 2 to the 30 times something which is like the largest conceivable computation. That's our normal level of paranoia. This is the full level of paranoia. Then again, if taking the full level of paranoia is affordable and your smartphone doesn't drain the battery, you might as well use that one because, hey, why not? Maybe you overlooked something. And this one will certainly be harder to break than that one. Like if it's a similar design and just you have 2 versions with different key sizes, probably using the big one won't hurt you unless it really hurts your battery. So the main thing that crypto is fighting against is no crypto. The main thing that Google, okay, do you still remember when Google didn't have HTTPS? So I remember giving talks and complaining about Google that like the world has moved on, we now have HTTPS, and Google still doesn't do searches with HTTPS. It was too expensive for Google to run HTTPS. And now for at least 5 years, Google has done HTTPS searches on all their products. But there were times when they had Gmail with HTTPS, but not Google search. So they had paid money to have a certificate so they could do HTTPS, but they still wouldn't want you to do searches with HTTPS because it was too expensive to have all the encryptions be done for all the customers. And that has changed. Computer power has gone up. Each of you now has devices which are as powerful as like a laptop. Okay, 15 years ago or something, your smartphone is much cooler than that. So Google is no longer so concerned. Also, the Google power has gone up. They have a bigger server farm. So now we can do encryption. But there's still lots of services which are not encrypted. When somebody decides, yeah, encryption is okay, then most of the time they can do either, at least for the things we're going to see in the first half of this course, or the second half, it actually gets more noticeable if you upgrade your key size. Anyway, so we have a much shorter key. This is something you can have. This key is either negotiated or is, well, somehow agreed on something with something which we're going to do in the second half. And now you might end up encrypting something which is lower than 128 bits. You can't just XOR it. So you must have a way of taking your short key and expanding it to something much longer. And the first concept we're going to look at is called a stream-cipher. So a stream-cipher takes a short key and expands it So stream-cipher is called stream-cipher because it expands it into a stream of bits. So you plop in your 128 bits, and then you kind of turn a crank, and it spits out a bit, another bit, another bit, another bit. It might spit out 4 bits at a time, depending on how you generate it, but you can infinitely pull the crank, and it will always spit out some bits. Now, all you put in is 128 bits of randomness, so eventually, well, maybe after 2 to the 128, but eventually this thing will repeat. It's a deterministic procedure. It can't be giving you arbitrary many results. But you would like to have that this procedure will give, for a long, long time, random looking results. So it expands it into a stream. So these should look like a random stream of bits. And then what you do is you take this stream and use that as your one-time pad. So you're starting from here, and your next message is going to be all the output from this machine until the end of your message. Then you encrypt it by doing XOR. And then the next time you want to send a message, you start from here and you pull the crank as long as your message is, and then you continue. So you're going to use this output stream We're going to use it in the OTP, so a one-time pad way. So we have the message, and then we have message bit 0, message bit 1, message bit 2, etc. And then we have the stream, which is dependent on this key, and it's going to give us stream bit 0, stream bit 1, stream bit 2, and we're going to have the XOR M0 XOR M2 S0, sorry, M0 XOR S0, M1 XOR S1. M2, XOR, S2, etc. Now, if this is a physical device like the Enigma, you have these rotors, or I was saying you turn a crank, then it's kind of reasonable to say, okay, we stop today, this was my transmission to Alice, and then when my next transmission to Alice starts, I start turning the crank again. But then I actually have to remember how far I went. And this is kind of inconvenient. What we normally do is we actually have the stream cipher start from a key, which is long-term and shared, and some string, some other 128 bits, which we call the initialization vector. So the way that all of these stream ciphers work is that there is some starting state, and then we just say, well, this starting state is another part of how this message starts. And then you can have, instead of having one long string, you have different chunks of strings. And each time you start a new transmission, you choose a new initialization vector. This is the first thing that goes through your crank, and only then you deal with your message. And that means you don't have to remember anything but the key. Now, okay, how does the other party get the initialization vector? We will want to have our stream ciphers be such that we can send the initialization vector in clear. It should not necessarily be predictable, depends on what cipher you're using. Sometimes you can just use the time of day or something, like something which is public and predictable. It can be a counter. First message to Alice could be an IV. Or some ciphers insist that this is a random string. But it's a random string, and it must be okay to transmit it unencrypted. So, could remember state and start the message, start the next message after the end of the first. But we don't want anything volatile. We don't want anything where we have to modify the values. So we don't want to store So for instance, you might get a smart card which contains your key. It's burned in there, it's read-only memory, you can't modify it. And that's part of the security policy. Nobody should be able to read out your key, nobody should be able to do something. And then all you can do with a smart card is you feed in text and you get ciphertext out. And if you want to start with the next ciphertext, you need to have some way to remember the state. And if you can't keep the smart card in the reader in power for the long time, there's no place where you could remember that you have advanced for so and so many bits. Now, of course, what you could do is the next message, you feed a lot of zeros at the beginning. So you have used 135 bits, and you feed 135 bits of something, you ignore those, because it's just XOR, and then you start. But then it also becomes really inconvenient. Once you have sent 100 messages, you have to, each time forward for the whole thing at the beginning, ignore those, cut them off until the end, and that's a fresh message. So NIV is super, super useful to make this practical. So use an initialization vector. Along with the key K to start the key stream at a random position. This will become clear on Monday when we go through some examples of stream ciphers, what it means to feed this IV into it. But our stream cipher encryption, the encryption function under key K will now take an encryption vector, an initialization vector IV, and a message. And it will then send some ciphertext, which in plaintext sends the IV and some C. So the IV gets sent in plain. So there's nothing hidden about the IV. So the stream cipher must be okay with us, and then there are different requirements on what this IV has to satisfy, what the stream cipher has to satisfy. So different requirements. E.g., it might be that the stream cipher says that the initialization vector must never repeat. That is a very likely criterion. Because if I say that this IV tells you where in the key stream to start, if you would use the same IV, that means you would start at the same position again. And then we use our stream cipher, well, we use it as a one-time pad, and we're now starting at the same position twice. So, for example, typically, the IV may not repeat. But it may be, well, but is allowed to be predictable. So that means use time or just the counter. There are now some few encryptions which are more idiot-proof. So, because people have repeated IVs, I mean, you might say, hey guys, didn't you learn how to count? But I was just giving you an example of it, the smart card where I don't have any memory. So it would already be a lot more convenient if I just need to remember the counter, if I need to remember 135 as the length of the message, instead of having to run through all the 135. But still, that means I have to remember 135. And now, if I'm a smart card and I don't have any place where I can be written to, or I'm a virtual machine and I might be restarted with something, then I might just not know what the time is, I might not know what the counter is, so I might accidentally do something. So then there are some which are more foolproof and they allow you to reuse the IV a limited number of times. Or there is limited damage from it. Like, you might learn something about this, but you still can't predict the rest of it. So for instance, with the stream cipher, the criterion will be, yeah, it looks like a random string. That was not very intuitive, but it means, well, a security criterion, if you can distinguish a stream cipher from a random string, or from the output of a stream cipher from something that's truly random, it's not a good stream cipher. It also means if you see some parts of the stream, like you get the first 100 bits, you should not have any chance of predicting what the next bit is. Okay, 50% chance you have anyway, but you shouldn't get anything which is significantly larger than 50% in predicting the next bits, even if you have a large number of bits that somebody gives you. So you see the first 100 bits, you can ask any 100 bits you want, you still should have 0 chance of guessing the next bit. Give you 1,000 bit, no chance on the next bit. So the stream cipher unpredictable. So the attacker cannot guess bit n plus 1 with more than 50% probability after seeing first n bits. It's more than 50% chance. That's a typical requirement on a stream cipher. It's unpredictability. Now, if you were a little let down from saying, oh, your one-time pad is impractical and we're going to settle for some less things, let me remind you of how you normally generate your one-time pads. If you ask the computer for some randomness, what your computer is doing is it waits for some short seed of randomness and then use some math function which are deterministic to expand those. So when you ask, say, the Linux random number generator, def-random, what def-random gives you is the kind of stretched version of randomness. So def-random is actually taking a pool of randomness and then running something which is a kind of integrated stream-cipher on this seed and outputs. Now, def-random is also adding more to the pool, so it's not just a stream-cipher. It starts by harvesting whatever randomness is sitting around, then expands this, then says, oh, you've done another keystroke, let me take some randomness from there, put it in there as well. That makes it hard to repeat. But at the math core, if you would have a system which doesn't get any feedback from the outside world, what def-random is doing is basically a stream-cipher. The nice thing about a stream-cipher instead of def-random is that actually I and the person I want to talk to can do the same thing. We only need this key of 128 bits. We need to have a stream-cipher which is publicly described, anybody can see it, and then we can do this computation on both ends the same way. So instead of sending a long key in the one-time pad, we just have a way of generating the stream on both ends. And if any of you was evil and got the first 8 bits, you will still not get the 9th bit. So you can see anything until here, and you should still be totally blank on what I have there. So that's a lot better than using the one-time pad twice. Monday we're going to see some examples of how we get this. Thanks.